So once again, I don't think I need every week to express my simcha and my schus for this beautiful, beautiful and very special endeavor. So in a paradoxical way, as I said many times, maybe I've been giving more shiurim in this period than ever before, definitely to bigger crowds. So last week, just at the weekend, I spoke to Achenu Beis Yisrael in Mexico, and I had a shiur to the Kallah in Chile. And Friday, I spoke to Los Angeles. They had a mishmer Thursday night, Leil Shishi. And Baruch Hashem, it's been an amazing time. So today, we opened our kollel in Yerushalayim. And all the Avreichim wear masks. And around my place, it's a strange feeling. I sit in a cage with a plastic mechitza between me and the others. So the Yungalite could distance themselves one for the others, but they want to come to speak and learning to me. So it's a strange time. But we need to take advantage of every circumstance and every challenge we face. We need to take advantage. Lahadgul Torah ulahadira. So I thank you all for this very special opportunity every Yom Rishon, every Sunday, to share Divrei Torah with you. And especially, as I explained before, we have been dealing with the most important and fundamental sugyas in Avodas Hashem. We spoke about Hilchos Tefillin, Hilchos Kriyas Shema, and Berchas Hanahen, and Berchas, and now we're in Berchas Hamazon. And now this is the second shiur on Bרכת Torah. And the topics we will be discussing today are really fascinating topics, and some of them mamish negea halacha l'maisa. So in our previous shiur, at the outset, the beginning of the shiur, I brought the machlokes, is Bרכת Torah min haTorah or midrabanan? So the Rambam omits Bרכת Torah from the minyan of Taryag. And the Ramban wonders, why did the Rambam not include Bרכת Torah as one of the Taryag mitzvahs? So the Ramban argues it's min haTorah. B'das Rambam, there are different opinions. Halacha l'maisa. The Mishnah Berurah Sif Kotten Yud Gimel Siman Mem Zayin makes it clear that Bרכת Torah is d'oraisa. That seems to be the opinion of the Beis Yosef and the majority of Poskim. So the Mishnah Berurah says, when a person is mesupik, did he say Bרכת Torah or not? This is a very strange suffix. How could a person be mesupik whether he said Bרכת Torah or not? But in the course of human experience, everything could happen. I know Yid very well, as a very special Yid, and it was a shtickle, he had a sense of humor. And people loved to shmooze with him. He was a big shmoozer. So he told me that he was once standing in shul, holding the kesher of his tefillin shel yad, and he asked his neighbor, am I putting on my tefillin or am I taking them off? I don't remember. Well, that's a strange shaila. I assume it never really happened. It was just a joke. But the Mishnah Berurah deals with a situation in which a person is mesupik. Did I say Bרכת Torah or didn't I say Bרכת Torah? And he says, he needs to say Asher b'chabonim ha'kol because Bרכת Torah d'oraisa. But the three brachas are definitely not d'oraisa. Even when we spoke about Berchas Hamazon, we brought various different opinions. And according to some opinions, the mitzvah min haTorah is just to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kol echad lefi tzachos l'shoynoi. So the three brachas of Bרכת Torah, Asher Kiddushonu, v'harevnu, Asher b'chabanu, are definitely not min haTorah. So the Mishnah Berurah paskins, if he's mesupik that I say Bרכת Torah or not, he needs to say Asher b'chabanu. But then, tzorech iyan gadol, because dealing with the question we spoke about in our previous shiur, which was before Shavuos, and we spoke about the question, you're up all night, do you say Bרכת Torah in the morning? The Mishnah Berurah says, because it's a machlokes and a suffix, and it depends on Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh, as I explained last week, suffix brachos lokal. But l'chayra, we don't say suffix brachos lokal only because brachos are midrabanan. If brachos would be min haTorah, then we wouldn't say suffix brachos lokal. It's a sveika d'oraisa l'chumra. The klal, the fundamental principle of sabal, which is Rosh Hashanah suffix brachos lokal, is because brachos are midrabanan. So if the Mishnah Berurah paskins why would we say Sofek Brochas Lahakal regarding the question of Kol Halayla, and that's in Shibur Sivkon Chav Ches? So one might argue, and listen to this argument because it makes a lot of sense. Even if Berchas HaTorah is the Uraisa, but Shittas Rabbeinu Tam that a person needs to say Berchas HaTorah every morning, regardless of whether he slept or not, is definitely only Midarabanan. And it's reasonable to assume that Minat Torah, Kuli Al Mamoida, that Behefsik Tolui, and not in the day. So when Rabbeinu Tam argues that Berchas HaTorah doesn't depend on Hefsik, it depends on the day, and therefore Shinas Klabitz Orayim is not Mechayev Berchas HaTorah. Rabbeinu Tam is Medama. He associates Berchas HaTorah with Berchas HaShachar. And just like you need to say Berchas HaShachar every day in the morning, the same applies to Berchas HaTorah. Well, Berchas HaShachar is definitely L'Rabbanan. So one might argue, even if we assume that Berchas HaTorah is the Oraisa, but Shittas Rabbeinu Tam that you need to say Berchas HaTorah every day in the morning, regardless of whether you slept or not, is definitely only at Konos Choma, like Berchas HaShachar. And therefore, regarding to an other suffix, any other suffix, a person is mesupik, did I say Berchas HaTorah or not? We say Sveika D'Uraisa L'Chomra. But regarding the Machloikes Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam, Kol Halayla, if you're up all night, do you need to say Berchas HaTorah in the morning? Regarding this suffix, everybody would agree that Berchas HaTorah is Midrabanan, and therefore that is a Sveika D'Rabbanan and not a Sveika D'Uraisa. That would be my original thought. Adayin Tzorach Iyun Ktsas, because according to Rabbeinu Tam, if we do assume that a person needs to say Berchas HaTorah every day in the morning, even if originally it's a Tekonos Chachamim. But bearing in mind that a person says Berchas HaTorah every day in the morning, then when he says Berchas HaTorah today, he has no kavanah to pater himself only up to tomorrow morning. And tomorrow morning he will say it again. And therefore, even if originally we would say that's at Tekonos Chachamim, but lemaisa it becomes a chiyuv d'uraisa because the brachas he said yesterday wouldn't pater him only up to the next morning. And that is the opinion of the Magen Avraham. That is the explanation of the Magen Avraham. However, in my Sforim, primarily Minchas Oshor, I think the very first volume, maybe even the very first siman, I wrote an Arichas Gedolah on the question, could a person b'chlal limit the scope of his brachas? And I dealt with various different shaylas. So a person has a tray of fruit. He has grapes, he has apples, he has pears, he has oranges. They're all Boda Priya weights. Could he say Boda Priya weights on the grapes, even though he does intend to eat apples and pears as well? But he wants to be Marbe B'brachas. He wants to be Mashlamei Brachas. So his kavanah is to say Boda Priya weights on the grapes and not to pater the apples. Then he's going to say Boda Priya weights on the apples. And then another one on the pears. Is that legitimate? Would it be a brocha levatala or only a problem of brocha she'ein tzricha? So the same question is, if according to basic halachic definition, Berchas HaTorah depends on hefsek, and as long as you didn't sleep, you don't have to say Berchas HaTorah again, would it make a difference that his kavona is to pater only till tomorrow morning? Is that valid? Does that make any difference? Or would we say, he said about the Priya weights and he intends to eat grapes, apples, pears, oranges. He cannot limit the bracha to affect only the grapes and not the other fruits. In the same way, if by halachic criteria he doesn't need to say Berchas HaTorah every morning, would it make any difference that his kavanah was only to bench for one day? So I brought many sources, lakan v'lakan. It's not the focus of today's shir, so I won't get into it. It's a fascinating discussion, You could look it up in Shalas Teshuvos Minchas Osher. But so the argument that even though Shittas Rabbeinu Tam, that one needs to say Bרכת every day in the morning, is that the Rabbanon, is kind of like Bרכת Shachar, but Kivan Shenagu came, it turns into a Chiyuv D'Oraisa, and it's once again a Sveika D'Oraisa. So to me, it's not a Milsa de Pshita. The other argument I want to make is, a few weeks ago, you heard from me in this very same venue, one of the Zoom shiurim I gave on a Sunday. I do not recall exactly when it was. And this is a aside I spoke about many times, because to me it's a Chiddush Otzum and a revelation. So you heard from me that all the mitzvahs that are tantzis avodas ukeil, and they're not associated with Shabbos and Yom Tov, they must be mitzvahs of Seder Hayoim. And that is why the Rambam writes, Chayav Odom Le'espalel B'kol Yoim, even though the source of mitzvahs Torah D'Oraisa, according to the Rambam, is La'ovdei B'chol Avavchem. And in that posuk, there is no specification that a person needs to daven every day. Neither is there a Gemara anywhere that it's a mitzvah D'Oraisa to daven every day. And I explain, Oimek Divrei HaRambam, the profound idea, the Jewish routine, Seder Hayoim Shel Odom Yisrael, is a Seder Hayoim Shel Avodas Ukeil. And it's not coincidence that all the mitzvahs that are essentially Avodas Ukeil, by their very nature and very essence, either are associated with Shabbos and Yom Tov or Seder Hayoim. And it goes the other way around as well. So Tefillah, Berches Koyanim, are mitzvahs D'Oraisa. And there's no remez in the posuk when these mitzvahs are incumbent on us. Once a day, once an hour, once a week, once a year, once in a lifetime. The posuk doesn't say. So Lani is daiti, all the mitzvahs that are by their very essence and very nature, avodas ukeil, if they're not associated with Chagim and Shabbos, like Kiddush V'Avdolah, Matzah, Moreh, Sukkah, V'Lulav, they must be mitzvahs shel Seder Hayom. So there's room to argue that the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, that Berachas HaTorah is a mitzvah every morning, is min HaTorah. It's not a D'Rabbanan. It's every morning because Berachas HaTorah is avodas ukeil. It is the essence, the pinnacle of avodas Hashem, and therefore it is incumbent, bears upon us each and every day. It's true that Rabbeinu Tam writes that Berachas HaTorah is every day, like Berachas Shachar is every day. So this dimyan, this associating Berachas HaTorah with Berachas Shachar definitely indicates it's the Rabbanan, because nobody says Berachas Shachar is min HaTorah. But maybe the Rabbeinu Tam just means a dugme ba'alma, but the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam that Berachas HaTorah is each and every day, maybe is min HaTorah, based on the aside I explained in the past, and I just mentioned it again. That all the mitzvahs that are tamtzis avodas ukeil are mitzvahs of Seder Hayom. So how do I deal with what seems to be a stira Mishnah Berurah? On one hand, he maintains Bechsa Torah D'Oraisa, on the other hand, like Abedner Koralayla, he says Savik Brachas Lakula. One of two drochim. Derech number one. I think the Mishnah Berurah feels that Ikar Halacha Kishitas Arash, not Kishitas Rabbeinu Tam. And Mi'ikar Adin Shinas Krabitz Uraim is Machayev Berachas HaTorah. When you examine the Mishnah Berurah carefully in this Sif Yud Aleph and Siman Mem Zayin, seems to be clear that that's his Natiyah. And he quotes the Gra. And the Mishnah Berurah, as we know, was a big chassid of the Gra. Lemaisi doesn't go against the Mechaber. The minig is not to say Berachas HaTorah, but the Mishnah Berurah is strongly noita, she'ikar halacha k'shittas harash. And maybe that is why he says, Sofek brachas l'kol, you're up all night, don't say berachas atay. Another approach would be, after all, there are opinions that say berachas atay is midrabanan. Mishum chumras u'avera shel bracha levatola, we say Sofek brachas l'kula. Because even a Sofek Kallah is enough to say Sofek brachas l'kula. It is only when a person is mesopek that I say berachas atay or not, that he paskins sveika d'uraisa l'chomra. But any Sofek in halacha, which is a different type of Sofek in its very essence, is the halacha k'rosh or k'shittas arbeitam, we would say sabal Sofek brachas l'kula. And this brings us to a very interesting question. It is very common, I think in Israel more than in America, but it's common in America as well, because the Jewish world today, to our dismay, there are a great many of our brethren that aren't observant, that aren't Shomer Torah, that aren't Shomer Mitzvahs, and they mingle with us. In the past, Jews lived in the ghetto, and the assimilating Jews, the first thing they wanted is to escape the ghetto, to move out, to be part of the Goyish world. So there wasn't that much interaction between frum Jews and non-frum Jews. We live in a different world, and we mingle with non-frum Jews all the time. In America and Europe, but even more so in Eretz Yisrael. And Eretz Yisrael, there's so many families in which some of the members are from, some are not from. You step into a taxi, and it is so common that the taxi driver might be Masorti, traditional, and he sees a frum Jew, and many times he says, HaRav Yomar Dvar Torah. It's quite obvious that the person didn't say Berachas Atayr in the morning. He doesn't seem to be frum at all. But we do want to give him a Dvar Torah at his request. So if we tell him, Tilbash Kippa v'tevarech Berachas Atayr, in all likelihood, he'll say, Fadrainish a cup, Michael Tavis. Okay, just go on. So, are we entitled to share a Dvar Torah with a person that didn't say Berachas Atayr in the morning? Maybe that would be defined as an Avera, as Lifnei Iver Lo Titen Mirshal. Is there Lifnei Iver Lo Titen Mirshal? I'm not giving him a Dvar Avera, so now the Zohar the Gemara speaks about Menayin Shalei Yoshet Odom Eva Menachai Lebnei Noach Kois Yayin Lenozio. But there are two sources in Shulchan Aruch HaChaim in which it is clear that even when a machshel, a person with bitul mitzvahs say, not with a lo tasa, not with macholas asuris like yayin lenozar even and achai lebnei noach, even if a machshel, a person with a bitul mitzvah, still is lifnei yiver. Kuf samach gimel siv beis, Shulchan Aruch says, you cannot give bread to eat to a person that won't do netilas yadayim. Because midrabanan there's a chiyuv netilas yadayim lepas. Kuv samach tet siv beis, a related halacha. You can't give any food to a person if you know he won't make a bracha. So in Kuv samach gimel, bitul mitzvah sasei derabanan shel netilas yadayim. Kuv samach tes bitul mitzvah derabanan berachas hananin. And in both counts, in both halachas, the Machame says, it's a problem. So how could you give a Dvar Torah to a person that didn't say Berachas Atayr? That should be even a bigger problem, because he's Mavatal and Mrs. Say Weiss. Netilas Yadayim lepas derabanan, Berachas hananin derabanan, Berachas Atayr diuraisa. So how could you share a Dvar Torah with a person that it's quite obvious he did not say Berachas Atayr? So this is an interesting shaila. And the person that asked me this question many years ago was Yedid Nafshenu. Many of you learned Torah from Rabbi Yitzchak Silverstein in Bnei Brak, the son-in-law of the great Rav Yarchei. And he told me that he asked his great shver, and his shver says, because they're not mechamen lemitzvahs Talmud Torah, then they don't have a chiyuv of Bרכas Torah. They don't have a chiyuv. Memela, there is no lifnei yira. But this brings us back to the discussion we discussed last week. If we assume that Bרכas Torah is not associated with mitzvahs Talmud Torah, but rather with a chefza of Torah, Briskerov Sofel Chesbrochas quoting his great father Reb Chaim. And last week I argued that that's a machlokes between the Beis Yosef and the Vilna Gaon. According to the Gra, depends on mitzvahs Talmud Torah. According to the Beis Yosef, it's etzem haTorah. So we're not dealing with an apikoros, with a koifa that doesn't believe in Torah and Shemayim. We're dealing with a good Tamimistic Jew who's Masorti. He's not an apikoros. Maybe he even goes to shul on Shabbos. We don't know. He definitely doesn't say Bרכas Torah. But the fact that he asks us to share with him Advar Torah means he does appreciate. He does understand Kedushas HaTorah. It's choshev to him. He wants to hear Advar Torah. So, hadra kushya leduchte. So to me, I think the answer is a very simple one. Simple and profound, and akuda amuko. And many times I wonder, things that seem simple to me don't always seem to be so simple to others. But Lanias Daiti, the solution is a very simple one. Lo oilom ein levater ikar mipnei hatofel. So yes, Bרכas Torah might be a mitzvah d'oraisa, but it goes without saying, and every bardas understands that Bרכas Torah is a tofel to Talmud Torah. Just like every Bרכas mitzvah is a tofel to the mitzvah, and the mitzvah is probably more important than the bracha. Especially regarding Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Talmud Torah is the biggest mitzvah. Talmud Godel Shel Talmud Meivele de Maisa. So if we have a dilemma, are we mevatel Talmud Torah or Bרכas Torah? We would always prefer to be mevatel Bרכas Torah and not Talmud Torah. Because Bרכas Torah, whether it's the Orais or the Rabbah, definitely is a tofel to Talmud Torah. And that is one of the reasons I paskin regarding the question we dealt with last week. You're up all night. What do you do in the morning? So if somebody's supposed to come to shul to be moitzi the others with Bרכas Torah, could we learn in the time being till he arrives? Or would we say it's a loisa shachar, stop learning? No. We would never be mevatel Talmud Torah for Bרכas Torah. Keep on learning till he arrives. So if we have a dilemma, we could avoid saying Advar Torah to this person that wants to hear Advar Torah, because we don't want to be machshel him and not saying Bרכas Torah. We would prefer being mevatel Bרכas Torah and not Talmud Torah. And that is why, yes, it is preferable. Teach him Torah. You can never know. Hamor shabo yachzirem lemutav. Talmud Torah is mashpia. But by halachic definition, ein levatel tofel mepnei, ein levatel ikar mepnei atofel. And I want to bring two examples, powerful examples. We have a mitzvah of tzedakah. And there's a lav, al yere levavcho betitcho loi. Al yere levavcho betitcho loi. That's in Parshas Lei. So when you give a person tzedakah, don't feel bad about it. Give him b'seiva ponim yofis. And if a person doesn't give b'seiva ponim yofis, it's a lav, al yere levavcho. So if a person knows he has a problem with his midas, he's very stingy. Is it preferable not to give tzedakah, or to give tzedakah and be oiveran al yere levavcho? Tzedakah is a mitzvah to say. Al yere levavcho is a lav. Lav imar chomu mitzvah to say. Minchas Osher Kloli HaMitzvahs, one of my most precious form, was published think 2 years ago, and it was published about 5 times since then. It was reprinted. There's a big siman, a big discussion. Ma chomer tfei, bitul mitzvah saseh or lo taseh. And the maskon of that siman is clear as daylight. Averes lav, chomer mebitul mitzvah saseh. So would it be preferable not to give tzedukah at all, and that's a bitul mitzvah saseh, than giving tzedukah and feeling bad about it? That's a lav al yereh. And a lav is chomer mitzvah saseh. To me, it's so pashut. But al yereh levavcha was definitely a detail in mitzvah tzedukah. When you give tzedukah, you need to know how to give. So it's a tofel. Ve'ein levatel ikar mepnei tofel. Doesn't make sense not to give tzedukah at all because you don't want to be over on the lav of al yereh levavcha. Another example. Person has a lulav. And it's one of the days Chalamoid in the morning. He's on a tiyul. He's about Shuba. He doesn't remember the Nusach HaBrocha. He has no one to ask. And the battery on his cell phone is dead. So he can't look it up. He can't ask. And he has a dilemma. Should he be noitel lulav and be mevatel the brocha? Or is it better not to be mevatel the brocha, then let him abstain from netilas lulav? Lulav b'shar hayomim b'gvulin is a mitzvah derabanan. So lulav derabanan berachas a mitzvah derabanan. If he takes the lulav and he doesn't say a brocha, he's mevatel mitzvah derabanan b'kume v'asei. If he refrains from taking the lulav entirely, he's mevatel a mitzvah derabanan b'sheva al taisa. Would a sensible Rav paskin better don't take the lulav? You're mevatla mitzvah derabanan b'shev al taisa. Better than taking the lulav and being mekayim the mitzvah and mevatel the brocha. That's kum v'asei. Poshut, that's amaratzis. That's stupid. We're not going to be mevatel mitzvahs lulav because of berchas lulav. Berchas lulav is a tofel to mitzvahs lulav. Of course, it's preferable to be makayim the mitzvah without a brocha than not being makayim the mitzvah at all. Why? This is the rabbanon, that's the rabbanon. This is kum v'asei, that's shev al tais. Tzedukah al yereh levavcha. Al yereh levavcha is alav. Nesinas tzedukah za'asei. So this proves what to me seems to be a milsa de pshita, a poshet svora, ein levatel ikar mepnei tofel. And the same applies to the relationship, the linkage between Talmud Torah and Berachas Torah. As important as Berachas Torah is, and I think the previous year we pointed out how important this bracha is. Al mo'av de ha'aretz. Alazva misterosi shalei bohu b'Torah tchila, the Gemara says in Adon Pei Aleph. But it's still posher that Berachas Torah is a tofel to Talmud Torah. Ve'ein levatel ikar mipnei ha'tof. Which brings us to another question. If Berachas Torah is diurais, is it ma'akev in mitzvahs Talmud Torah? So the source of this discussion is the Gemara in Brochas Tes Vav Amud Aleph. Brochas Tes Vav Amud Aleph, the Gemara says regarding Berachas HaMitzvah, Brochas derabanan, the Brochas lo ma'akvi. So the Gemara deals with the brocha and afroshes trumas and maisis. So the Gemara says a mafresh without a brocha, truma is chal, because the brochas derabanan and therefore brochas aren't ma'akev. The Pnei Yehoshua is medayik from the Gemara. What is the reason Berachas HaMitzvah are not ma'akev? Because of the Rabbanon. If Berachas HaMitzvah would be Mana Torah, they would be ma'akev. And we would say, if you're Makayim a mitzvah without the bracha, lo yotza yedei chayrosa. And I once again refer to Minchas Osher Klolei HaMitzvahs. There's a big discussion. in Mechasosha Kallah is regarding Berchas HaMitzvah, the essence of Berchas HaMitzvah. Is Berchas HaMitzvah milta achrita, or is it part of the mitzvah? I think we mentioned this question before. The Pri Megadim has the same understanding as the Pnei Yeshua, but the Pnei Yeshua doesn't deal aloha l'maisa, and the Pri Megadim does. Tov Reish Pei Hei. Pri Megadim says when a person is koira kriyas parsha zohar without berchas HaTorah, maybe he's not yoytze the kriya, because berchas HaTorah is the oraisa. And if brachas are the oraisa, they are ma'akiv b'kiyam ha'mitzvah. So maybe he wasn't yoytze the mitzvah of kriyas parsha zohar. Pri Megadim simen tov reish pei hei. Neither the Pri Megadim nor the Pnei Yeshua didn't see the Rosh in Tosfos HaRosh. They couldn't see the Rosh because Tosfos HaRosh was printed after their lifetime. But the Tosfos HaRosh and Brochus on the spot says that when the Gemara says Brochus B'Rabbanan or Brochus Lomakva, that's in a Rav Chibur Milsa. But even if the Brocha would be Menatayra, it's still not Ma'akev B'Kiyum HaMitzvah because Brocha L'chuda, Mitzvah L'chuda. And why would the bracha be ma'akev and kiyum ha'mitzvah? But the Pnei Yeshua and the Pri Megadim understand from Pashtus Divrei HaGemara that a brachas would be min haTorah, they would be ma'akev. And this brings us to a fascinating question. Tshuvas Dvar Avram. The Dvar Avram was Kovner Rav, one of the greatest gedolim in Lithuania. He was the Rav of Kovner, which was a major Kallah. Chelak of Tshuvas Dvar Avram Semetes Zayin, he quotes Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. In a letter to him, he corresponded with Rabbi Chanan. Rabbi Chanan has a very interesting question. He says, Kim Dumani, I think that we learn in Shulchan Aruch that you're not allowed to learn without Berchas HaTorah, which is an interesting sprach, this interesting way of saying it. I think. Well, Rabbi Chanan was one of the Gedei Landor, but primarily he was a yeshiva, was a marbit study, not a posek. So he writes, I think they're not allowed to learn without Berchas HaTorah. And he asks why. According to the Rosh, Rabbi Chanan did see the Tosfos HaRosh, that if brachas would be min haTorah, they would be ma'akev, and Berchas HaMitzvah is min haTorah. So if you learn Torah without Berchas HaMitzvah, you don't have a mitzvah of Berchas of Talmud Torah, because a bracha d'oraisa is ma'akev in the mitzvah. So it's not Talmud Torah. If it's not Talmud Torah, you're not mechuyev in Berchas HaTorah. So what would be the issa to learn without a bracha? It's a bracha d'oraisa, it's ma'akev in mitzvah Talmud Torah. So if you learn without a bracha, it's not Talmud Torah. If it's not Talmud Torah, you don't have a mitzvah of Berchas HaTorah. Interesting. So Rabbi Chanan concludes that this proves that Berchas HaTorah has nothing to do with mitzvahs Talmud Torah, rather etzem Talmud Torah. Rabbi Chanan was a Talmud of Rab Chaim, but obviously he didn't hear from Rab Chaim what the Brisker Rav heard from his great father. So to answer this question, Rabbi Chanan reaches the same conclusion as the Brisker Rav quotes from his father, that Berchas HaTorah is on the Chefetz of Torah and not on mitzvahs Talmud Torah. I must confess that I don't understand Rabbi Chanan's kasha at all. It's not that I disagree with his teretz. It's okay. I think he's right. That's the shit of the B'S Yosef, as I explained last week. But I don't understand the kasha. After all, we have a mitzvah, ki shem Hashem ekro, havu goydel le'elokeinu. Moshe tells Kallah Yisrael, when I will teach you Torah, havu goydel le'elokeinu, we all need to say the bracha. So this is the mitzvah. When you learn, before you learn, you need to say the bracha. So Ma'abekach, why would it make a difference if you don't say the bracha? It's not Torah, and if it's not Torah, What's the difference? It is Torah, it's not Torah. It is a mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah. But this is the mitzvah of Bרכת Torah. Ki Shem Shemek lo havugei l'Elokei. When you learn Torah, see to it that it's Torah. See to it that it's mitzvahs Talmud Torah. And how do you do that? By saying the bracha. So the mitzvah to say the Uraisa is, when you learn Torah, say Bרכת Torah, and thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu shebacha banu makroam v'nosan lanu es Torah. So this is an interesting question. Bרכת Torah is the Uraisa. Is it ma'akev in Talmud Torah or not? And this brings me to the last shlav, the last stage, the last part of today's shir. And this is Divrei Torah I heard many, many years ago. Oh, I would say it's about 50 years or so from Mori Rabbi, the Divrei Yatzif.
That is picture in the back of the Rav, if I may ask?
Yes, yes. That's a drawing one of my Talmidim in Yeshiva's Teres Chaim drew out of the, yes, that's with me every week in this room. Yes, that's the Divrei Yatzif. That's my great Rebbe. So when I come into this room to learn and to give shiurim, I have inspiration. So many years ago, goes back approximately 50 years, I would say. Chulin Dav Beis Amud Aleph. First Tosfos in Masechet Chulin, and we find it again in Masechet Zevachim. Tosfos quotes Hilchas Eretz Yisrael that Noshim are posel l'shchita. And Tosfos says it's against the Mishnah. Hakol shachta. So, ein lahashgiach on the Sefer Hilchos Eretz Yisrael. Who is this Hilchos Eretz Yisrael? How could he write halacha against the Mishnah? So the Rosh, Siman Aleph, at the very beginning of Masechet Chulin, also quotes this Sefer. And the Rosh goes a step beyond Tosfos, and the Rosh writes, ein lahashgiach. Because he also writes, and that definitely isn't right. It's against the Gemara in Brachas Tezvav, Brachas Eino Ma'akvos. And therefore, Ein lahashgiach ala Sefer Hilchos Yisrael. Don't take him seriously. Oisei Chochem, kosav halachas midatoi. That's what Tosfos and the Rosh both say. And they reject Hilchos Yisrael that says shochat v'loy birech shchitosei psula. To the Kleisenberger Rebbe, some of you maybe heard his Torah, saw him. Usually, anything that's in the Rishonim is valid. Ein halacha k'moisoi, but it needs to have a pshat, and we need to try to understand. So the Kleisenberger Rebbe came up with a spark of genius because he was a genius. He was an Ilui, one of the greatest Gedolim of our time. So the Kleisenberger Rebbe argued this. Hilchas Eretz Yisrael would be logical to assume that it's based on Talmud Yerushalmi. Talmuda de Bnei Eretz Yisrael. So in the Yerushalmi, in the very beginning of Perek Ketzad Mevorchen, the Yerushalmi says, Menayin shemevorchen ala mitzvahs, shenema ve'etno locho ha-Torah ve'shnei lochas even ha-Torah ve'ha-mitzvah. Iskash Torah le-mitzvah, kishem shemevorchen ala-Torah, kach mevorchen ala-mitzvah. So obviously the Yerushalmi feels that Berches ha-mitzvah is the Oraisa. We learn Gzera Shava, ha-Torah ve'ha-mitzvah, kishem shemevorchen ala-Torah, kach mevorchen ala-mitzvah. So if we put together the Yerushalmi with the Tosfos HaRosh and Brachas Tezvav, the maskana would be Shochad v'loy birech shchitosei psula. Because the Rosh and Brachas Tezvav says if Berches HaMitzvah would be Torah would be Ma'akev. Shaloi. So that is the Prima Godim. Actually, the Rosh supports the Prima Godim. I might have made a mistake before. The Pnei Yeshua says it's L'Rav Chedemilsa. But the Rosh supports the Prima Godim. Tosfos Rosh says that If the bracha would be min haTorah, it would be ma'akev. So if we put together the Tosas HaRosh with the Yerushalmi, so the Tosas HaRosh and the Pri Megadim learn Pshat and the Gemara and Brachas as well. If Bechas HaMitzvah would be in Torah, it would be ma'akev. And the Yerushalmi does learn Bechas HaMitzvah and Brachas HaTorah. And Hilchas says it's all is based on Talmud Yerushalmi. And therefore, Shochet v'lo birach, Shchita soy psula. The Rosh and Tosas are right by rejecting the halacha. Goes against the Gemara. Because Bavli learns clearly that Bechas HaMitzvah midarabanan. But according to Yerushalmi, if Bechas HaMitzvah min haTorah, and if we combine the Yerushalmi with the Tosas HaRosh, Shochet v'lo birach, Shchita soy psula. That is only lepilpulo. But I don't think it's right for a very, very simple reason. We have a few sugyas of Bavli dealing with the question of mitzvahs sichas kavana. And all the different cases of mitzvahs sichas kavana, obviously the person didn't say a bracha. Hatorkei al shir. He's blowing a shofar just because he enjoys the music. Kafu v'ochel matzah. And aforpike nechlaku gedol hamaram mitzvahs sichas kavana or not. We find the very same sugyas in Yerushalmi. Saf psochim, legabe morar, saf Rosh Hashanah, legabe shofar and matzah. The very same sugyas we find in Bavli, we find in Yerushalmi. So how could one argue mitzvah saying sichas kavana and he's yotzeh? How about the bracha? He didn't say a bracha. How could he be yotzeh? And the Yerushalmi, the Resh Perik Beis the Brachas clearly says, Hoye koire b'toira v'giazman kriya shema mekan shabrachos ein ma'akvois. So it's a befresh Yerushalmi in various different sources that brachos ein ma'akvois. Why? Either the Yerushalmi doesn't accept the Tosas HaRosh interpretation, and the Yerushalmi goes according to the Pnei Yeshua, even a brachas arm and a Torah, it's not mistaver the ma'akav v'kiyum ha'mitzvah. Or we would assume, kedivrei Pri Megadim in the Akdomet Hilchos Brachas and most other achronim, that the Drosh in Yerushalmi is only an asmachta. And the Yerushalmi, like the Bavli, maintains that Bechas HaMitzvah midarabanan. None of the Rishonim or achronim maintain Bechas HaMitzvah d'Oraisa, and the Pri Megadim clearly says that the Drosh in Yerushalmi is only an asmachta. So who is this Hilchas Eretz Yisrael? It's a fascinating historical story. It has nothing to do with Eretz Yisrael. The Mordechai brings part of the story in the very beginning of Masechet Brachos. It is actually called Hilchas Eldad Hadoni. And this is a story that goes back 1,100 years. Le'emei Rabbeinu Tzemach Gaon was one of the Gaonim. So the Mordechai in the beginning of Chulun brings Rabbeinu Baruch heard about a sefer from Eldad Hadoni. So this Eldad arrived to the great Torah centers in Babel, claiming he is a member of a shevet, a Jewish shevet from Eastern Africa. And all the halachas that he brought are Hilchas Shchita. He brought a sefer in Lashon Kodesh only on Hilchas Shchita. Every halacha starts Mepi Yehoshua al Yedei Moshe Mepi Gvura. So Eldad Hadoni argues that in East Africa there are huge Jewish tribes that belong to the Aseres HaShvatim. He claimed to be a descendant of Shevet Dan, and that's why he presented himself as Eldad Hadoni. And all he brought is Hilchas Shchita. And every halacha starts as if they received this halacha from Yeshua ben Nun, from Moshe Rabbeinu, Mepi HaGevura. And these halachas that the Tosfos and the Rosh quote are in Sefer Eldad Hadoni. Has nothing to do with Eretz Yisrael because he came from Africa, not from Eretz Yisrael. So Tosfos calls it Hilchos Eretz Yisrael. Some theories argue that it was a Rosh Tevis Aleph Yud and it means Eldad, I don't even know what. But the source of these halachas are Sefer Eldad Hadoni, claiming to be from the Aseres HaShvatim. Many argue that the Falashim in Ethiopia are descendants of those tribes that Eldad Hadoni spoke about, claiming that they live mitachas lahorei choshech in Eastern Africa. So that's the story of this Sefer Hilchos Eretz Yisrael, which the Mordechai brings, is actually Hilchos Eldad Hadoni. So it's not really one of the Rishonim that we have a Mesoros about. It's a strange Sefer that has no Mesoros whatsoever. And all the Rishonim that quote the Sefer or reject them. Tosfos, Rosh, Mordechai. And it's a strange story about Eldad Hadoni claiming to have halachas of Torah Shebal Peh, b'Mesoros from Yoshua ben Nun, mepi Moshe, mepi Agvura, which sounds fabulous. So that's the story of Eldad Hadoni. So an interesting interpretation of the Klosim Rebbe to explain the halacha, but as I said, Tosfos, Rosh, Mordechai all reject these halachas that they have no source in our Mesorah, and they go against the Mishnah and against the Gemara and Talmud Bavli. So I think this is a fascinating sugya. Today we discussed the Bרכot and various different aspects that are me'inyan le'inyan ba'osayu inyan. So part of today's shiur was on a fundamental question, whether brachos d'oraisa are ma'akev, what's the reason that brachos aren't ma'akev, and to me, very special importance about the Yesod I explained about ein mevatlin ikar mepnei hatofel, and that is the reason whenever any Jew would like to learn Torah, well, if we could teach him to say Bרכos Hadera, definitely would be preferable. But if it's clear to us, if we impose on him to say Bרכos Hadera, we won't be able to teach him Torah. It is always preferable to teach Torah, even if we're mevatel Bרכos Hadera, than not to teach Torah at all. So we use every opportunity we have lelamed es b'nei Yisrael Torah. So as I mentioned, Baruch Hashem, today was the first day I gave a shiur in my kollel with all the precautions and according to all the rules of Mishlad Abiriyut, and I very much hope things will get better. We are worried because this weekend there was a new wave of infection, a new wave of people that got this disease, and obviously in schools. So most of them are not from schools, but I'm afraid the reason is only they opened up before we opened up our schools. So we are waiting and davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that things will work out fine and there will be no additional wave of disease. And I hope in America things will get better soon and we will be zeicher once again to open yeshivas and kollel and botei medrash and botei knesses. So thank you once again for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Rav Gatazman Yedidi, and we should all together be zeicher lahagel Torah u'la'adira. Thank you and have a wonderful day.